This week, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the notion of shame and how it plays an enormous role in the maintenance and construction of the other. Let's get started. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Dwight Turner. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to yourselves. Like I said at the top of the program today, we're going to talk about shame and how it actually forms, maintains the distancing of one's own sense of otherness, and how it actually even creates the other. But I want to start with a story to actually sort of highlight where I'm coming from with this particular episode. There's a story about a friend of mine. A friend of mine said he gave me this permission to actually tell this story about his time at school. A man of colour like myself, and, you know, it was back in the 1980s. So he went to a mainly white school in a very sort of, mainly white sort of area of West London, back in the 1980s, like I said. And when he was at school, especially at secondary school, he really did struggle to fit in. He found it very hard to make friends, to maintain friends and so on, because he was very much the outsider. And the other kids there, as always, would pick on him relentlessly. If it wasn't about his colour, it was about what he wore, it was about how he dressed. Ultimately, what he ended up feeling was horribly depressed, but also very, very ashamed of who he was and how he presented himself to the world. So much so that he actually tried to not be a black man in 1980s Britain. I mean, that is actually quite simple. He tried to dress very white and so on. He tried to ignore his own sense of difference, his own sense of authenticity, out of a sense of shame. Now, when he gave me this story, and he reminded me, because we went to the same sort of school together, what I realized was shame has a huge role to play in otherness, in creations of the other. That idea that actually, if you're different in some way, it's not okay. You've got to fit in to a majority's way of being. You know, we talked about ideas of assimilation in one of the previous casts. And one of the ways that that's done is by making that which makes you different shameful. So if you're seen as, I don't know, a woman, or if you're seen as gay in some way, and you're at school or wherever, or work, whatever it is, whatever it is that makes you stand out is actually denigrated and put down, so much so that you end up feeling a sense of shame about it and sabotage it yourself. It really becomes quite insidious. That's where shame has a huge role to play. It eats away at one's own sense of identity, and actually we try and avoid that. Ways of trying to avoid that are actually about trying to fit in. The problem with shame is this. It's twofold in a way. In negating that which makes us authentic out of a sense of shame over that sense of authenticity, what we end up doing is internalizing and a form of self-hatred. We start to hate that which makes us unique in some way. And the other part to it, which I probably need to point out here, and it's actually a lot more subtle, is that the shame is not totally that of the others. Partly that shame comes down to that group, because it's normally a group, if it's not just one person, it's normally a group who have a preconceived idea about how one is supposed to be. And they're ashamed that they are not able to stand out and be different in their own way, shape, or form. We sometimes see this with artists, pop artists, David Bowie, Prince, whoever else, people who actually, for whatever reason, were able to stand out on the outskirts of the society and stand in their own sort of power, even though they were denigrated, put down, criticised, teased, whatever it might be. They didn't take on that element of shame. And actually what happens at the end is those people who allowed us, we see this so often, those people who allowed us in their criticism of that sense of difference start to move gently towards it when they realize actually they have nothing to be ashamed of anymore. So shame becomes the roadway between that which is seen as normal and that which is seen as different, both externally and internally. This is the one thing I want you to take away from today. That actually, if we are able to hold our sense of shame, it can become a huge motivator for us to be who we are really meant to be. Got there in the end. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to yourselves on aspects of difference and otherness. I love doing these sort of casts. It's good fun. I love the feedback you give us as well. Please do keep putting stuff down in the comments below. Follow us on Twitter and on Facebook at Being the Other. It's a pleasure to talk to yourselves. We'll talk to you again soon. Take good care. Bye-bye.